My wife told me, "I can no longer be with you, old man. You are now too broke and weak." So I signed the divorce. She forgot what was written in the prenup agreement. What happened next changed everything. I will tell you how it unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Susan Howard from Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had always believed that love was about weathering the storms together, about holding each other's hands when the world tried to pull you apart. For decades, I built my life around that belief. My name is William, and I had spent most of my adult life building a business that I thought would take care of us until the end. It was a small construction company I had started from scratch, a testament to years of sweat, calloused hands, and sleepless nights. And through it all, my wife Clara had been by my side, or so I thought. Lately, things hadn't been going well. The economy had taken a turn for the worse, and with it, my company's fortunes crumbled. My days were consumed by endless meetings with creditors and silent, shame-filled dinners with Clara. I remember the heavy silence that clung to the air in our house, a silence so thick that even the sound of cutlery scraping against the plates felt intrusive. It wasn't long before the cracks in our marriage became chasms. I tried to hold on, clinging to the memory of the woman who once believed in me. But every night, she'd look at me with eyes that seemed to say, "You're not enough anymore." She'd started dressing up more than usual, applying lipstick and perfume even when she had nowhere to go. I knew the signs, but I told myself I was imagining things, that she'd come around once I got the company back on its feet. Then one evening, she came home later than usual. She didn't even bother with an explanation. She walked into the living room, where I sat hunched over a pile of unpaid invoices, and dropped her handbag onto the couch. She stood there, her arms folded across her chest, her expression cold and unyielding. "William," she said, her voice as calm and measured as if she were discussing the weather, "I can no longer be with you, old man. You are now too broke and weak." The words sliced through me like a blade. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask her how she could say that to the man who had given her everything he had. But no words came out. My throat tightened around the pain, and I felt something inside me break. She didn't even flinch. She just watched me, waiting for me to react, her eyes hard and unfeeling. I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my chest and looked down at the invoices in front of me, their numbers blurring into a meaningless haze. "If that's what you want," I managed to say, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. She didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there with my shame and my heartbreak. The next day, I signed the divorce papers she presented to me. There was no discussion, no argument. She had already made up her mind, and I was too tired to fight. I watched her as she left the house for the last time, her suitcase in hand, and I realized that the woman I had loved for so many years was gone. In her place stood a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a burden. That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey in my hand, staring at the empty chair across from me. I thought about the years we had spent together, the laughter we had shared, the dreams we had built. All of it felt like a cruel joke now, a memory that mocked me with its sweetness. I wondered if I had been blind all along, if Clara had always been waiting for the moment when I would falter so she could walk away without guilt. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in our bed, my bed, now thinking about how quickly love could turn to contempt, how easily someone could forget all the sacrifices made for them. My mind was a storm of regrets and recriminations. I tried to remember when things had changed, when her eyes had stopped lighting up at the sight of me. But the truth was that I couldn't remember. All I knew was that I was alone, and the woman I had once called my wife had walked out on me when I needed her most. In the days that followed, I went through the motions of living. I woke up, made coffee, and tried to salvage what was left of my business. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the life I had lost, photos of us on the mantel, the wedding band she had left behind on the nightstand. Each reminder was like a dagger in my side, a cruel reminder that everything I had built had come to nothing. But in the quiet of those lonely nights, when the house was silent and the whiskey dulled the ache in my chest, a small, stubborn voice in my head kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one who had failed. That perhaps I had given everything I could, and it was she who had failed to see my worth. And so, even as I signed those papers and watched Clara walk out of my life, a small part of me began to heal. Because for the first time in a long while, I saw that her leaving wasn't the end of me, it was the beginning of something new. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I wandered through the house in a haze. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, highlighting the fine dust that had settled on the furniture, as though even the house had grown tired of waiting for life to return. I moved from room to room, touching the things we had chosen together. A vase from our trip to Italy, the quilt she had once spent hours sewing. Each object felt like a relic of a life that no longer belonged to me. I ended up in my office, the one place where I still felt a semblance of purpose. My desk was cluttered with papers, legal documents, bills, old receipts that I hadn't had the energy to sort. As I sat down and sifted through the mess, my fingers brushed against a thick envelope buried beneath the pile. I pulled it out and stared at it for a moment, my breath catching when I realized what it was: our prenuptial agreement. We'd signed it all those years ago in a lawyer's office downtown. Back then, it had seemed like a formality, something to reassure Clara's father that I wasn't marrying her for her family's money. I had agreed without hesitation. I was so sure that nothing could ever come between us. I remembered how she had squeezed my hand as we signed, whispering, "It's just a formality." Well, I believed her. I believed in us. I hadn't thought about that document in years. But as I unfolded it now, the neat black print seemed to leap off the page. I read the clauses slowly, each word sinking into my mind like a revelation. Then I reached the section I had almost forgotten existed. In the event that either party initiates the divorce process, said party shall forfeit any claim to the shared properties acquired during the marriage. I sat back in my chair, the weight of those words pressing down on me. My chest felt tight, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She had walked away. She had filed for divorce. In that one decision, she had signed away her right to everything we had built together. I laughed, a hollow, almost hysterical sound that echoed in the empty room. The irony of it all, after all her talk of me being too weak and too broke, she had left with nothing. I closed my eyes and leaned back, feeling a surge of relief and something dangerously close to triumph. It was a bitter victory, but it was mine. All those years of scraping by, of working myself to the bone to build a life for us, it wasn't all for nothing. My house, my business, the money I had managed to save even in those lean years, they were all still mine. I thought back to that night when she stood there in the living room, telling me I was too weak. My hands clenched into fists. She had seen me as disposable, a man past his prime, someone she could discard once I was no longer useful. But she had never really known me, not truly. Because if she had, she would have known that I never gave up. Not on myself, not on the things I had earned through blood and sweat. I spent the rest of that day poring over the prenup, making sure I understood every detail. It was all there, black and white, undeniable. My lawyer confirmed it when I called, his voice brisk and matter-of-fact. "She has no legal claim to your assets, William. The prenup is airtight. You're free." Free. The word rang in my mind, unfamiliar and exhilarating. For the first time since she'd left, I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. I wasn't a ruined man. I was a man who still had something to fight for myself. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work with a renewed determination. I met with old clients, took on small projects to keep the business alive, and slowly, the weight on my shoulders began to lighten. Each day felt a little less heavy, a little less haunted by the ghost of what had been. At night, I would sit in the living room with a glass of whiskey, the prenup locked away in my office safe. Sometimes I would catch myself smiling, thinking of how she had left thinking she was trading up, only to find that the price she paid was everything we had built. I wondered if she regretted it already, if she lay awake at night wishing she had chosen differently. But I didn't let myself dwell on that for long. Clara had made her choice, and so had I. And in the quiet of those nights, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the fresh start I hadn't known I needed. It was a few weeks after the divorce was finalized when I first saw Evelyn again. She was Clara's best friend, the one who had stood at her side during our wedding, beaming as we exchanged vows. Over the years, Evelyn had been a constant presence in our lives, her laughter filling our home during dinner parties, her gentle counsel soothing the sting of small arguments. I never saw her as anything more than a friend of the family, a warm, dependable soul who always knew the right thing to say. When I ran into her at a mutual friend's dinner party, I was surprised by how different she looked. She was radiant in a simple navy dress, her hair swept back from her face to reveal a pair of striking, steady eyes that met mine with quiet intensity. We exchanged polite pleasantries at first, each of us wary of the awkwardness that might hang between us. But as the evening wore on and the conversations grew looser with wine, we found ourselves sitting across from each other at the edge of the patio, a small fire flickering between us. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine as she spoke. "I heard what happened, Will," she said softly, her voice heavy with unspoken sympathy. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been." I looked down at her hand, at the way her fingers rested so naturally against mine. "It was harder than I ever thought it would be," I admitted, my voice low. "But in some ways, I think it was a relief. Clara and we weren't happy for a long time. I think I was just too stubborn to see it." Evelyn's eyes softened as she squeezed my hand. "You've always been stubborn, Will," she said, her lips curving into a small, sad smile. "But that's what I've always admired about you. You don't give up easily." I felt something stir inside me then, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a warmth, a sense of being seen for who I truly was rather than what I could provide. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. I found myself telling her things I hadn't even admitted to myself, how I had felt like a failure when the business struggled, how Clara's words had cut deeper than any wound. Evelyn listened without judgment, her eyes never leaving mine. As the night wore on, our conversation shifted from the past to the future. She told me about her work, her plans, the quiet joys she found in her garden and her art. I realized how much I had missed the simple pleasure of talking to someone who wanted nothing from me except my company. It was like a balm to the raw places inside me. When the night ended, she walked me to my car. The air was cool and crisp, and I could see my breath as we lingered in the driveway, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said, my voice rough with emotion. I didn't realize how much I needed this, needed someone to just listen. She reached up and brushed a stray hair from my forehead, her touch feather-light. "Anytime, Will," she said softly. "You're not alone. Don't ever think that you are." I drove home that night with her words echoing in my mind, her gentle touch still warm on my skin. In the days that followed, we began to see each other more. At first, it was innocent. Coffee in the mornings, quiet dinners where we talked about everything and nothing. But slowly, something deeper began to blossom between us. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the way her laughter could cut through even the heaviest silences. One evening, as we sat together on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me and said, "I know this is complicated. I know it's not what either of us expected. But I can't pretend I don't feel something when I'm with you." I reached for her hand, my fingers tangling with hers as I whispered, "I feel it too, Evelyn. More than I thought I ever could again." We sat in silence after that, the weight of our confession hanging between us like a secret promise. And in that moment, I realized that life wasn't about holding on to the things that hurt us. It was about finding the courage to let them go and open ourselves to something new. As I looked into her eyes, I saw not just the comfort of friendship, but the possibility of love. Real, honest love that wasn't built on what I could give, but on who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. Life with Evelyn felt like a second chance, a quiet kind of salvation that I hadn't dared to hope for. We took things slowly at first. Dinners that lingered into late-night conversations, Sunday mornings spent sipping coffee in the kitchen, our laughter mingling with the aroma of fresh brewed beans. It was a tenderness I had forgotten I was capable of, a reminder that love could be soft and healing instead of sharp and punishing. I never expected to see Clara again. I thought she'd moved on, that she was somewhere else building a new life without me. But one afternoon, just as Evelyn and I were settling into the rhythm of our days together, she appeared at my door. It was raining that day, the kind of steady, relentless downpour that turned the world gray and cold. I opened the door to find her standing there, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like a woman who had spent too many nights wrestling with her own regrets. "William," she said, her voice trembling, "can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, my heart thudding in my chest. A part of me wanted to slam the door shut, to keep her on the other side of my new life. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had once loved, stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room, her eyes sweeping over the space that had once been ours. It hadn't changed much, same couch, same coffee table scarred with old memories. But the atmosphere was different now. The silence was no longer heavy and suffocating. It was warm, inviting. Evelyn's gentle touch had made it a home again. Clara stood there, her hands wringing together as she struggled to find the right words. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice cracking. "About everything. About how I walked away. I was wrong, Will. I was so wrong." I leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest. "What do you want me to say, Clara?" I asked quietly. My voice was steady, but inside I felt a storm of old wounds and fresh resolve. She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "I thought I was making the right choice. I thought you were done, that we were done. But I've been so miserable without you. Please, Will, can we start over?" For a moment, the memory of the woman I had loved rose up in me. The woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, who used to curl against me at night with a sleepy smile. But then I remembered the cold finality in her voice when she'd told me I was too weak and broke for her. I remembered the way she'd walked out without a backward glance. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice low. "You didn't just leave me, Clara. You left everything we built together. And you did it because you thought I was no longer enough for you. That doesn't just go away." Her tears fell freely then, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't know what I was doing," she sobbed. "I was scared. I thought I needed more. But I see now that I was wrong. Please, Will, I'm begging you." I watched her for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I saw the desperation in her eyes, the realization that she had gambled and lost. But I also saw something else, a flicker of the same self-interest that had driven her to leave in the first place. I took a slow breath and shook my head. "I can't, Clara. I can't go back to who I was. And I won't go back to who we were. I've found someone, who reminds me that I still have something to give. Someone who sees me for who I am, not just for what I can provide." Her face crumpled then, her sobs breaking the silence of the room. "You're with her, aren't you?" she whispered. "Evelyn." I didn't deny it. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm with Evelyn now." She let out a choked sound, part sob, part laugh. "How could you?" she spat, the anger rising in her voice. "She was my best friend. I stood my ground. And you were my wife. But you chose to leave. Don't come here now and act like you're the victim." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The rain drummed against the windows, the only sound in the room. Finally, she wiped her tears and looked at me with a cold, resigned expression. "I see," she said. "I suppose I deserve this." I didn't say anything as she turned and walked to the door. She paused for a moment, her hand on the knob, and then she was gone. I stood there for a while after she left, staring at the empty space she had occupied. My heart was pounding, but there was a strange calmness in me too. I had faced her, and I had chosen myself. When Evelyn came home later, I told her everything. She listened quietly, her hand resting over mine. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "You chose your peace." And in that moment, I realized that for all the pain Clara had caused, she had given me something I never would have found otherwise, the chance to truly see my worth, to stand in my truth without apology. Clara's departure that day left the air in the house charged with an eerie stillness. I thought I might feel regret, some echo of the old loyalty that once kept me tethered to her. But instead, I felt an unmistakable relief, as if the final piece of a heavy weight had been lifted from my chest. I spent the rest of the evening in quiet contemplation, the house no longer haunted by the echoes of our failed marriage. Evelyn came over later that night. She didn't knock, just let herself in the way she always did now, with an easy familiarity that warmed me from the inside out. She found me at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in my hands. Without a word, she slipped her arms around my shoulders, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. Her gentle touch cut through the last vestiges of doubt clinging to me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly, her lips brushing against my ear. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Clara was here," I said, turning my head to look at her. Her eyes searched mine, calm and unwavering. "And how do you feel?" she asked, her voice careful but not patronizing. Evelyn had a way of asking questions that never made me feel defensive, just seen. "I feel resolved," I said after a moment, surprising myself with the truth of it. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." She smiled then, a slow, luminous smile that reached her eyes. "I'm glad," she said simply, and in that small exchange, I felt all the strength I needed. But it wasn't just Clara's one visit that tested my resolve. In the days that followed, she started calling. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. The second time, I answered out of some residual sense of obligation. "William," she said, her voice tight with emotion, "I've been thinking about us, about what we could still have. I know you think it's too late, but I'm willing to do anything to make this right." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Clara," I said wearily, "I don't want to hurt you, but you have to hear me. I've moved on. I'm with Evelyn now. There's no going back." She was silent for a moment, and then her voice turned sharp, desperate. "So that's it. You're throwing away everything we had. For her." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my voice calm. "You did that when you left. I'm just finally accepting it." She hung up on me, and I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling an unexpected calm wash over me. Each call after that was the same, her voice shifting from pleading to angry to resigned, a kaleidoscope of emotions that had once ruled my life. But each time I answered, each time I repeated my truth, I felt more certain of the boundaries I had set. One evening, she showed up at the house again. Evelyn was there this time, and Clara's eyes narrowed when she saw her, but Evelyn stood her ground. I watched them face each other across my living room. Two women who had once shared every secret. The air crackled with tension, but Evelyn didn't flinch. "I see you've moved on," Clara said coolly, her arms folded across her chest. "How convenient for you, Will." Evelyn didn't rise to the bait. She just looked at her with a steady calm. "I didn't plan any of this, Clara," she said softly. "But I'm not going to apologize for loving him." Clara's eyes flashed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned to me, her voice trembling. "Is this really what you want?" "Her." I nodded, my voice steady. "Yes, it is." For a moment, she just stood there, and then she let out a hollow laugh. "I guess I was wrong about you," she said, her tone bitter but defeated. She didn't say goodbye, just turned and left, her shoulders squared as she walked out of my life for good. Evelyn closed the door behind her and turned to me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I nodded. "I am," I said honestly. "I think I'm better than I've been in years." That night, we sat together on the couch, the quiet around us no longer oppressive but peaceful. Evelyn rested her head on my shoulder, and I traced slow circles on her arm, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath against me. "I don't know what the future holds," I said softly, "but I do know that I'm done living for anyone else's expectations." She smiled and lifted her head to kiss me, her lips soft and warm. "That's all I've ever wanted for you," she whispered. As I held her in my arms, I knew that the hardest part wasn't learning to let go. It was learning to stand firm in what I deserved. And as the night wrapped around us like a comforting shroud, I realized that, at last, I was exactly where I was meant to be. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. There was no more waiting for the phone to ring, no more checking the door to see if Clara would show up again. The air felt clearer, the house quieter in a way that wasn't empty, but instead felt like a blank canvas, ready for something new. Evelyn and I spent our evenings together in the living room, the quiet laughter and shared silences a balm to my soul. It felt like I was learning to breathe again after years of holding my breath. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long golden shadows through the window, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, the same way I used to back when I felt like I was losing everything. But this time, the taste wasn't bitter. It was smooth and warm, and I savored it as I watched the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze. I thought back to the man I was only a few months ago, bent beneath the weight of someone else's expectations, convinced that my worth was measured in dollar signs and the comfort I could provide. I remembered the hollow look in Clara's eyes when she told me I was too weak, too broke. And I remembered how that look had felt like a sentence I would never outrun. But now, sitting in the soft glow of the setting sun, I realized that her words had been nothing more than a mirror for her own fears. She had seen in me what she refused to face in herself. The possibility of failure, of vulnerability, of a life that didn't fit into the neat, glossy picture she'd built in her head. And when she saw that crack in the facade, she ran. She chose the easy way out, leaving me to sift through the ruins of a life we had built together. I don't hate her for it anymore. I suppose that's the final step in letting go, realizing that people leave because of their own brokenness, not yours. Clara made her choice, and I made mine. In the end, it wasn't about money or pride or even betrayal. It was about learning that I didn't have to keep trying to fix what someone else was determined to break. Evelyn came out onto the porch and sat beside me, her hair still damp from the shower, her skin glowing in the fading light. She tucked her legs beneath her and leaned her head against my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, her voice gentle and sure. I took a slow sip of my drink and let the silence stretch before I answered. "I'm thinking about how, for a long time, I thought my worth was tied to what I could give. I thought if I wasn't strong enough, if I wasn't successful enough, then I didn't deserve love. But I see now that it was never about that. It was about being seen, truly seen, and still being enough." She tilted her head back to look at me, her eyes soft and unwavering. "You've always been enough, Will," she said, her voice steady, "even when you didn't see it." I smiled at that, a small, grateful smile. "I know that now," I said quietly, "and I won't forget it again." The sun slipped below the horizon, and the world was painted in the dusky blues and pinks of twilight. I sat there with Evelyn, feeling her warmth beside me, and I knew that whatever lay ahead, I would face it with open eyes and an open heart. Clara had tried to come back into my life, to rewrite the ending she had once forced upon me. But I had stood firm, not out of anger, but out of a newfound respect for myself. I had learned that love isn't about who stayed the longest, it's about who stood by your side when the nights were the darkest. I thought back to the years I had spent trying to prove my worth to a woman who had already decided I was unworthy. And I thought about how, in the end, it wasn't her approval I needed. It was my own. I had spent so long waiting for someone else to tell me I was enough. And now, sitting there with Evelyn's hand in mine, I realized I didn't need to hear it from anyone else ever again. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs. "I'm done looking back," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. She turned her head and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. "Good," she whispered, "because we have a whole future to build." As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, I felt a calm certainty settle in my chest. Clara was a chapter that had ended. Evelyn was the beginning of something new, something I hadn't even dared to imagine when I was mired in the heartbreak of a failed marriage. I had faced the betrayal, weathered the fallout, and found my footing again. And as I sat there with the woman who saw me, truly saw me, I knew that this was the life I had fought for. A life where I stood firm in my boundaries, my dignity, and my quiet certainty that I was worthy of love, not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove that to anyone ever again. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and redemption. Share your own stories of standing firm in the face of heartbreak in the comments below. I'd love to hear your voice in this conversation. See you soon in the next story.